going to do something a little bit different today. As I started reading from my other book, Brothers and Warriors, I've had a few folks that have been on already, and especially some parents have asked me, am I going to read any of my younger reader books, my kids' books? I actually write for like the 10 to 14 age range, tweener kind of ages, preteen books. They're all adventure books that are set during the American Revolution. And I thought that'd be a pretty good idea to go ahead and start another playlist that features one of my younger reader books. And I'm going to start with a book that I'm really proud of. It's called A Bucket Full of Courage. And it's about Betsy Johnson of Bryan Station, which was in Kentucky. This was the first book in my Kentucky Frontier Adventures series. It's my desire to find young teenage or preteen children who were inhabitants or residents in the various frontier forts and stations throughout Kentucky during the Revolutionary War frontier period, and tell their stories. I'm only 2 books into this series so far because I'm writing too many different things. But this, I found Betsy Johnson entirely by accident. I stumbled across her while I was doing some other research, and I found some writings of hers in her older years that describe some of the events from her life. And I thought she was just a fascinating character and was involved in some really historic things. And so I wanted to tell her story. And so we're going to start. I know this is designed for young readers, but I have just as many grown-ups by these as well. So I figure the grown-up listeners out there might enjoy this as much as my other novels. And so we're going to jump right in. We're going to read chapter 1 from A Bucket Full of Courage, Betsy Johnson of Bryan Station. And we begin, of course, with chapter 1, which is called Missing Papa. Orange County, Virginia, October 24th, 1779. The sun was just dipping below the purple horizon. It bathed the Johnson home in the warm orange glow of sunset. The nearby maple and oak trees added their hues of red, yellow, and brown to the autumn landscape. It was the end of another long, work-filled day. Betsy Johnson watched the colorful sunset through the milky glass kitchen window. Outside, the world was silent except for the dull chop of an axe. Cyrus, the family slave, was chopping wood for the winter woodpile. Betsy glanced in his direction. She felt sorry for the old man. The kindly ancient African moved very slowly. The arthritis in his hands and stiffness in his back made it almost impossible for him to do much outdoor work, but still he tried to do his part. "Mama, did you tell Cyrus to chop more wood?" Betsy inquired. "I think we already have enough stacked for 2 winters." "No, dear. Quite the opposite, actually. I told him to sit on the porch and smoke his pipe and rest, but he is stubborn. He is simply trying to keep busy. His heart wants to accomplish more than his body will allow, I am afraid." "Well, why did Papa buy such a broken old man for a slave?" Betsy wondered aloud. "Because no one else wanted him, and your Papa's heart broke for the old man. He never really wanted a slave, but he wanted him to have a warm bed and a home. You know your father. He is as soft-hearted as they come." Betsy sighed again. Yes, she did know her Papa very well. She closed her eyes and imagined that he was watching the exact same colorful sunset wherever he might be. She uttered a silent prayer for her father and then walked toward the fireplace to help her mother with the evening meal. The tiny house was filled with heavenly smells. A fragrant venison stew was bubbling over the glowing coals of the fireplace. A fresh-baked, steaming hot apple pie was cooling on the center of the table. Dried herbs, flowers, and stalks of tobacco dangled from the rafters overhead. Hot tea was steeping in a pot on the hearth. Soon the smell of fresh-baked biscuits would overwhelm all the other odors. Jemima Johnson was covered with flour. She always made a mess when she rolled out dough for biscuits. The white powder covered her arms and face. A lock of her hair had escaped the front of her bonnet and hung annoyingly in front of her eyes. She tried in vain to swing the hair out of the way. She did not dare touch it for fear of getting gooey dough in her freshly washed hair. "Mama, you look funny," declared William, her youngest son. He giggled at the curtain of hair that covered his mother's eyes. "Why don't you help your mother just one bit, William? Tuck my hair back into my bonnet." She knelt down in front of the handsome little boy. She pulled the front of her bonnet out just a bit with her left. He pulled the front of her bonnet out just a bit with his left hand and used his right hand to tuck the wayward hair safely beneath. "Thank you, little man," declared his mother. She planted a kiss on his cheek. Just as he was pulling away from her embrace, she reached out with her right hand and wiped flour and dough on both of his cheeks. "Now who looks funny?" Her nose crinkled as she chuckled at the lad. "Oh, Mama," he protested as he tried to wipe away the sticky substance. Though annoyed at first, he soon began to laugh as well. Betsy was Jemima's oldest child. As in many families, the oldest child was also the most responsible child. Indeed, the little girl seemed to mature far beyond her tender age of 7 years. She stood beside the window with both hands resting on her hips, watching the good-natured teasing between her mother and brother in a depressed silence. Instead of a smile, a deep, tired frown clouded her face. The serious little 7-year-old was simply too tired to laugh. She and Cyrus did most of the outdoor work on the farm. It had been a long day of labor. Betsy had been up since before the sunrise. First, she had to milk the cows. Then she had to take care of the chickens, the sheep, and the goats. She also had to clean out the horse style and shovel all of the manure into the fertilizer pile. That was all accomplished before noontime. After a dinner of roasted corn, bread, and a fried apple pie, she spent the entire afternoon tending what was left of their meager garden. An early frost had killed most of their vegetables. The last of the corn had been picked. The tomatoes were dried up and dead, as were the squashes and the beans. She helped Cyrus pull up dozens of dead plants and haul them to the burn pile. All that was left in their precious garden was a few turnips, cabbages, and pumpkins. The farm work was doubly tiresome in her father's absence. Betsy longed to see her papa again. She missed him so much. He was the reason that she loved working on the farm so much. She adored spending time with her father. He was her best friend in the entire world. Much to her mother's chagrin, Betsy spent almost every waking moment with him in the barns and in the fields. Jemima Johnson declared on more than one occasion, "Betsy, the fields are no place for a young woman. You should be in the house helping me with the cooking and the cleaning." But Betsy wanted little to do with inside work. She wanted to be outdoors. In the end, it was all for the best. Betsy's skills on the farm had come in most handy during Robert Johnson's absence. Betsy's father had departed their humble little farm to travel to Kentucky back in April. He went there with his brother, Cabe Johnson, and neighbor, William Tomlinson. The men journeyed there in search of a place where they might settle and begin a new life on the frontier. Life in central Virginia had become too frustrating and difficult for the Johnson family and their neighbors. North central Virginia was no longer a good place for small farmers. The big landowners were buying up all of the land in their region. They controlled the state legislature and constantly created laws and regulations that crushed and oppressed the owners of the small farms. Things had not changed even after the Declaration of Independence and the formation of the new legislature under Governor Patrick Henry. So, Robert Johnson and his fellow adventurers had ventured to the western frontier in search of freedom, new lands, and new opportunities. That was 6 months ago. The family had not heard a single word from him in all that time. Betsy prayed every night that her father was alive and safe, but it had been so long now that she was beginning to lose hope. She feared that he had perished during the journey, most likely at the hands of the legendary Indians of the region. She dreaded the day when a messenger would come down the road to their house and deliver the fateful news. Her mother's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Betsy, dear, make sure that the stew is not scorching." Betsy turned and faced the large fireplace. She reached carefully with an iron hook and pulled the cooking crane out of the fire and suspended it over the hearth. The cooking crane was a large iron arm that was bolted to the stone wall on the left side of the fireplace. It allowed the cooking pots to dangle directly over the coals. As Betsy pulled with the hook, the arm swung slowly on its hinge, moving the pot away from the fire. Betsy removed the lid with a thick cloth, leaned forward, and sniffed the stew that simmered inside. She smelled delicious venison, onions, potatoes, and carrots. The aroma made her mouth water. She was famished. It had been almost 7 hours since she had eaten. "It does not smell scorched, Mama," she declared. "Well, give it a good stir anyway, just to make sure." "Yes, ma'am." Betsy picked up the large wooden stirring spoon from a nearby pewter plate and reached down to the bottom of the stew pot. She lifted and stirred the thick concoction. "It looks good, nice and hot. I think it is ready. The meat is falling apart." "That's fine, dear. Dangle it near the fire, but not over the coals, just close enough to keep it warm." "Yes, Mama." Betsy obediently pushed the stew pot back toward the fire. She stopped the cooking crane so that the stew hovered just inside the opening of the fireplace. "How much longer, Mama?" asked William. "I'm starving." "It'll be just a short while. I have to get these biscuits in the Dutch oven. They should cook quickly. Why don't you run outside and tell James that it is time for supper? By the time you two get back to the house and wash up, I will have everything on the table." "All right, Mama. But where is James?" "He's in the barn," answered Betsy. "I sent him to feed the hay to the horses, but that was over an hour ago. More than likely, you'll find him asleep in the hay stall. It's his favorite hiding and napping place." The energetic lad ran to the door. "I'll fetch him." He threw open the door and sprinted toward the barn. As usual, he left the door standing wide open behind him. Betsy sighed in disgust. She marched over to the door and closed it. She paused for a moment and leaned forward to rest her head against the smooth wood. Jemima stared lovingly at her daughter. "Betsy, you have done too much today. You need to slow down a bit. There was no need to do all that cleaning in the garden this afternoon." Betsy turned to her mother, and smiled. "I like to stay busy, Mama. It helps keep my mind from wandering." "Wandering where?" She paused. "To Kentucky?" Betsy's smile melted away. She nodded. She looked as if she were about to cry. Jemima felt tears forming in her own eyes. "Come here, darling." Betsy walked quickly toward her mother and tumbled into her flour-stained arms. Her mother squeezed her in a tight hug and showered her little girl with kisses. "Betsy, I'm certain that your papa is all right. I know he is. I would feel it in my soul if some disaster had befallen him." She knelt down in front of her daughter. "You must have faith, child. Faith in God and faith in your father. He will return, and then someday we will all go on a great adventure to our new home. Do you believe me?" Betsy's lip quivered. She wanted to believe her mother's assurances, but it was so hard. Papa had been gone for so very long. Huge tears trickled down both of her cheeks. Jemima scooped the little girl into her arms again. "Oh, my baby, why are you crying?" Betsy sobbed. "Because I can't remember him, Mama." "What do you mean?" "I can't remember Papa's face. I've forgotten what he looks like. I remember the smell of his pipe tobacco. I remember his brown waistcoat. I even remember his tomahawk and the scuffs on the toes of his shoes, but I cannot remember his face." The little girl went limp in her mother's arms and began to weep. She cried deeply. Her little body shuddered from her sobs. "Oh, there now," cooed her mother. "It's all right. You have not forgotten your papa. It's just been a long time, but you will recognize him the moment that you see him again. You'll see. Everything will be all right. I promise. You just wait and see. Jemima sat down in one of the dining chairs and held her little girl in her lap. She simply held and rocked Betsy and allowed the child to cry. She let her loving embrace comfort the heartbroken girl. After a couple of minutes, Betsy's sobs subsided and she snuggled comfortably into her mother's lap. The silence of their loving moment was interrupted by a sudden squeal in the front yard. Both James and William were screaming their lungs out. The sudden shrill noise awakened the baby Sally, who had been dozing quietly in her crib. She began to wail. Her tiny cries added to the confusion. "What in heaven's name is going on out there?" exclaimed Jemima. The boys' screaming seemed to be getting nearer to the house. They heard heavy footsteps on the porch, and then the door swung open. A huge, bearded man in buckskin clothes and a black floppy hat stood in the doorway. The man had James draped across one shoulder and William draped across the other. Jemima and Betsy stared at the strange man. They had never seen anything quite like this man. He looked like a hairy beast. The foul stench of his body odor invaded the room. His glowing white eyes were surrounded by dark and dirty skin. He grinned like a madman, exposing crooked, yellow-white teeth. The man's voice boomed. "I caught these two varmints trespassing in my barn. I need to speak to their mother right now." Even though the appearance of this huge man was unfamiliar, Betsy instantly recognized the voice. She leapt from her mother's arms and ran to the man. She screamed, "Papa!" Tell you what, we'll stop right there and we'll pick up chapter 2 in another section. Thanks for listening.